Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to do a deep dive into this interview with Yara Shahidi.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know,
Actress.
actress, producer, Harvard grad.
Yeah.
That's from the Lewis Howes YouTube channel, and it really got me thinking.
Yeah, it goes way deeper than just like a typical celebrity interview, I feel like. There's
Dude.
so much to unpack about success
Yeah.
and self-awareness and like finding your purpose
Yeah.
in a world that's always pushing you to go faster.
Yeah, and one of the things that really stood out to me was this story Yara told about writing down her dream endorsements when she was just 18. And guess what? By the time she turned 20, she had achieved every single one. I mean,
Wow.
talk about manifesting your dreams.
That's incredible. But I think it's important to note that it wasn't just about, writing things down, like hoping for the best. Yara talks about actively pursuing those goals, carefully choosing a team that aligned with her vision, and
Yeah.
making strategic decisions to get where she wanted to be.
Yeah, it's about taking action and surrounding yourself with the right people. She even mentions being very intentional about attending college, even while her acting career was taking off. It makes you wonder, have you ever experienced something similar, maybe on a smaller scale, where visualizing and then actively pursuing a goal led to something amazing?
I think we've all had those moments where things just seem to fall into place when we're clear about what we want, but sometimes that clarity can be so elusive, right?
Totally.
And that leads us to another interesting point that Yara brought up, the challenge of ease. She talks about feeling almost guilty because her career has felt relatively easy. And that really resonated with me.
I can see why that would be a strange feeling to grapple with.
Yeah.
You almost expect success to be this constant uphill battle, right?
Right.
But as Yara explains, it's not that things have been effortless, it's that the effort feels worthwhile because she's deeply aligned with her passions.
That concept of alignment is so crucial. When we're pursuing things that we genuinely love and are good at, there's often a sense of flow and less resistance. It doesn't mean we don't have to work hard, but the work itself becomes a source of joy rather than a burden. And we see that in Yara. She has an incredibly strong work ethic despite the ease she describes.
It reminds me of that saying, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. Of course, it's never that simple, but there's definitely truth to the idea that passion fuels our efforts.
Absolutely. And it's interesting how this idea of ease connects to another theme in the interview, the pressure of public perception. Yara shares how she felt like people were waiting for her to slip up because of this perfect image that had been created around her.
That must be so much pressure, especially for someone so young. It makes you wonder, how much do we even in our everyday lives let the opinions of others influence our actions? Is it even possible to strike a balance between being authentic and navigating those social expectations?
It's a constant dance, isn't it? And Yara offers a really interesting perspective on this. She describes her decision to attend Harvard as honoring a distraction from her acting career.
At first I was like, Harvard, a distraction.
Yeah.
But the way she explains it, it makes perfect sense.
Right. She realized that stepping away and pursuing something seemingly unrelated to her career actually reignited her passion for acting. It gave her a fresh perspective and allowed her to tap back into what she truly loved.
That's so powerful. It reminds us that sometimes the most unexpected detours can lead us back to ourselves in a profound way. And it highlights the importance of following our curiosity, even when it doesn't fit the conventional path. But then Yara takes this idea a step further.
Oh, you mean when she talked about not feeling the need to drink or party,
Mhm.
preferring to focus on her work? I found that so refreshing.
Me too.
Oh.
And before anyone jumps to conclusions, she's not saying there's anything wrong with those things. It's about making conscious choices that align with your values and goals.
Exactly. Yara's not advocating for deprivation. She's demonstrating the power of discipline. It's not about restriction. It's about empowerment. It's about intentionally saying no to certain things so you can say yes to what truly matters to you. So think about your own life. What are some things you choose to say no to? Not because you're forced to, but because it allows you to say yes to something more meaningful.
It could be as simple as saying no to that extra hour of social media scrolling, so you can read a book, or spend time with loved ones, or pursue a hobby.
And speaking of meaningful connections, I loved the story Yara told about her mother. She has this natural inclination to connect people she meets, and her father calls it building relationship equity.
What a great way to put it. It's about nurturing genuine connections, rather than just transactional networking. It made me think, are there relationships in my own life that I could invest in more deeply? And what are the benefits I've already experienced from those strong connections?
That's something we can all reflect on. But before we do, let's take a quick break and come back to explore some more Yara's insights. You know, as much as we talk about the positive aspects of success, there's often this underlying feeling of self-doubt that can creep in, even when things are going well. And Yara was really open about that, particularly this fear of not living authentically.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's interesting how she connects this fear to the pressure of public perception. We talked earlier about how she felt like people were waiting for her to slip up because of her perfect image. And it seems like that constant scrutiny made her hyper-aware of how she was coming across, even in casual settings.
Almost like she felt the need to perform chillness,
Mhm.
to counteract that perception of being a super intense overachiever.
Exactly. And it raises a question for all of us. How often do we modify our behavior based on what we think others expect of us, rather than just being ourselves?
Oh, man. Yeah, it's such a tricky balance, isn't it? Because on one hand, we want to be genuine and true to ourselves, but we also have to navigate social situations
Mhm.
where certain behaviors are expected. So how do we reconcile those two things?
Well, Yara talks about some strategies she's using to overcome that fear of not being authentic. And one that stood out to me was setting intentions before big events or meetings. Instead of focusing on outcomes, she tries to prioritize personal growth and honesty.
I love that. So it's not about how do I impress this person
Mm.
or how do I get what I want out of this situation,
Mm.
but more about how can I show up as my true self?
Precisely. And she gives an example of a recent meeting with a director, where she directly addressed a question about her lifestyle choices in a way that felt true to herself, even though it meant potentially losing out on a role.
Well, that takes a lot of courage to prioritize your integrity over potential career opportunity. That really speaks to her commitment to living in alignment with her values.
It does, doesn't it? And it seems like that authenticity is becoming a guiding principle. In her career choices as a whole, she mentioned how much she loves that people are starting to ask her what you want.
Which, as she points out, isn't always the first question asked
Mhm.
in the entertainment industry.
Right. It's often more about what can you do for us?
Mm-hmm.
So it's refreshing to hear that she's being given the space to explore her own desires and curiosities.
And that ties back to her point about honoring distractions, doesn't it? It seems like she's actively seeking out experiences that might not fit the traditional mold of what's expected of a successful young actress.
Absolutely. And she doesn't shy away from the things that don't come easily to her either. Like when she talked about being on The Great American Baking Show
Yeah.
and having to face the fact that she's not a natural baker.
It's funny because on the surface, it's like, okay, it's a baking show, who cares?
Oh.
But I think it speaks to a larger point about our willingness to embrace imperfection.
Exactly. And she even admitted to shedding a tear in the bathroom because she couldn't master a cartwheel. I mean, come on, who hasn't been there?
Oh my gosh, that's so relatable. And I think that vulnerability, that willingness to show up and try, even when we know we won't be perfect, is something we could all benefit from cultivating.
I completely agree. It's so refreshing to see someone so successful acknowledge that they don't excel at everything.
And speaking of success, she's incredibly honest about the challenges of dealing with fame and money at such a young age. Remember when she talked about feeling a twinge of guilt? About how easy things have been for her.
Yes, and that's where I think the concept of alignment becomes really crucial. Yara attributes her ease to being incredibly discerning about the opportunities she pursues. She and her family have a very clear sense of what aligns with their values, and they're not afraid to say no to things that don't fit.
It's such a powerful lesson. It's not just about working hard. It's about working hard on the right things, the things that genuinely excite you
Yeah.
and align with your purpose.
Right. Yara's story shows us that success doesn't have to be a grueling uphill battle. When we're in alignment with our true selves and our goals, the journey can feel more effortless, even though it still requires significant effort.
I love that perspective. But even with that sense of ease, Yara admits that she sometimes minimizes the challenges she's faced because she's able to look back on them with a more positive lens. And I think that's something we all do to some extent.
It's easy to fall into the trap of comparing our struggles to others and thinking, well, it wasn't that bad.
But what I admire about Yara is that she's aware of that tendency in herself, and she's actively working on being more honest about the difficulties she has overcome.
She's constantly striving for greater self-awareness, isn't she? And this leads her to reflect on the concept of mental fortitude. She expresses admiration for people who have faced immense challenges and persevered, and she wonders if she would have the same strength in similar situations.
It's almost like she's asking herself, okay, things have been relatively smooth sailing so far, but what happens when the real storm hits? Will I be prepared?
And I don't think that's about seeking out hardship for the sake of it. It's about recognizing that challenges are an inevitable part of life. and it's important to cultivate the inner resources to navigate them effectively.
It all comes back to that self-awareness she embodies, doesn't it? Yara's not just pondering these questions for herself. She's inviting us to consider them too. It's that kind of depth and honesty that makes this interview so much more than just a typical celebrity profile.
I couldn't agree more. And in the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore how these reflections connect to Yara's thoughts on discipline, the challenges of her generation, and her definition of true greatness.
You know, one thing that really struck me about Yara was her perspective on discipline. It's not something she shies away from, you know, even when it comes to things. A lot of young people consider fun.
Yeah, she's not afraid to make unconventional choices, is she? And I think what's key is the distinction she makes between choosing not to do something and feeling deprived. For Yara, discipline is about making conscious choices that align with her goals, not forcing herself to do things she hates.
It's like sometimes saying no can feel like you're missing out. But Yara flips that script. She's saying yes to what truly matters to her by saying no to the things that don't.
It's about being intentional with your time and energy, wouldn't you say? She talked about never being interested in drinking or partying, and it wasn't because she saw it as inherently bad, but simply because it didn't align with her preferences and how she wants to spend her time.
Right. And I think that's such an important message, especially in a culture that can sometimes glorify those things. It's about defining what fun means to you, not blindly following what society dictates.
Exactly. And that clarity about her values really shines through when she talks about the challenges her generation faces, particularly information overload and the constant barrage of news and social media. She even admitted to being an over-news listener.
Oh, totally. It's so relatable. It's like you want to stay informed, but it's so easy to get sucked into this vortex of negativity and anxiety.
Right. And she's taking steps to manage that, like consciously consuming less news and even turning her phone to grayscale to reduce the temptation of endless scrolling.
Yeah, it's almost like a digital detox, isn't it? These small acts of self-care can make such a difference.
They really can. And it shows a level of self-awareness that goes beyond the typical assumptions about her generation. She's not just accepting the status quo, she's actively shaping her relationship with technology.
And it's not just about her personal experience either. Yara also talked about how social media has shaped her generation's worldview. She pointed out that she had a childhood before social media was so ubiquitous, which allowed her to develop a sense of self that wasn't constantly being compared to others, carefully curated online personas.
It's a good point. She expressed a lot of empathy for younger generations who are growing up in a world where comparison is constant, and it can be difficult to distinguish what's real from what's like a carefully constructed facade.
It makes you wonder how that impacts our sense of self-worth and identity. It's definitely something to reflect on.
Definitely. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I can't help but think back to the question Lewis Howes asked Yara at the end of the interview. What's her definition of greatness?
Oh, yeah.
And her answer was so simple, yet profound. Authenticity. She believes that truly great people are those who have tapped into their unique essence, their irreplaceable selves. They're not trying to be anyone else. They're fully embracing who they are, flaws in all time.
It's about recognizing that your individuality is your superpower, and that true success comes from aligning your actions with your values and your authentic self. And that's something we can all strive for, regardless of our age or what we do.
Absolutely. So as we leave this deep dive, we invite you to consider Yara's words and ask yourself, what does it mean to live authentically in your own life? How can you embrace your individuality and let go of the pressure to conform to external expectations?
The journey to authenticity isn't always easy, but it's a journey worth taking. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep exploring.